All right, here we go. I titled this chapter 3, Tanya. Why does your doctor smoke cigarettes? I actually have a better title for it, but I'll explain why I chose that topic in particular. Because, as I told you one time, I broke out in some sort of rash. I broke out, and I wasn't sure what it was. I felt very sick. It was Purim. I didn't drink anything or anything like that, and I felt I had a fever, and I had stuff all over my body, like pimples all over my body. So there was a doctor in our yeshiva, and he said, "Come to my office tomorrow. I'm not concerned about it right now." So I came the next day, and I come in, and he's like, he had clearly just came in. He's probably 110 pounds overweight. He just like laid into 5 cigarettes and came. He's like, "All right, I'm going to try to figure out what's wrong with you." And he could tell that I was like not being receptive to what he was saying, because I thought, here's this guy who clearly doesn't take care of himself. He doesn't know how to take care of himself. How is he going to take care of me? And he could sense that I felt this way. And he said to me, "Elia, I know I look the way I look and I smell the way I smell. Does it help that I went to Harvard Medical School?" And I said, "Yeah, it does actually." He goes, "Okay, I'm going to figure out what's wrong with you." And he did. And I had strep throat, and it was the end of the strep throat. And I had strep throat for like 2 days or something. And that's the way it ended, got rid of the toxins. I broke out in these like pimples all over my body. Anyway, I was very impressed. Let me give you another example. Right now, there's something going on with in Afghanistan. I'm going to explain what I'm trying to say. There's something going on in Afghanistan. Now, all my life, I would sit in front of let's say if it was a TV or if it was a computer screen, I would be eating my pizza, and something horrific would happen on TV, like a tsunami, God forbid, thousands of people have died. And as the pizza sauce is dripping down my mouth, I'd be like, "That is horrible. That's the worst thing I've ever seen," as I'm biting into another slice of pizza. Somebody should do something about that. Sauce all over my face, wiping my napkins, taking another sip from my Mountain Dew. Why? If it's so bad, so horrible, why was I not motivated? How could I be sitting there having pizza sauce dripping down my mouth? How could the doctor, who clearly knows all the problems with being overweight and smoking cigarettes, yet still smoke cigarettes and be overweight? And the answer lies in this chapter. And there's something called das, that we have intellect and emotions. Intellect is objective, and it knows the right thing to do, but your emotions do whatever they want to do. And there's something called the Meitzer Hagaron. There's this little neck. It gets very narrow. Yeah, the right thing, you have this expansive brain, this expansive mind. In order for it to trickle down into your heart, into your emotions, it's got to pass through this very narrow passageway called the Meitzer Hagaron, where things, I don't know if I'm really ready to act upon. What this chapter is going to discuss are the 10 attributes of the soul. The soul expresses itself in 10 ways. 3 intellectual traits and 7 emotive traits. The intellectual traits are called Chachma, Bina, and Das, and the 7 emotive are called Midos. Now, the word for Midos is actually measure. It means emotions, but it also means measure, which one of my favorite lines or messages from the Talmud is, how do we measure somebody? Your midos, what's the word for measuring somebody? Midos, their emotions, their character. We don't measure somebody by their wealth or their intellect, their pedigree, but by their emotions. How emotionally mature are they? And ultimately their character, which makes up their character. That's how Judaism really measures a person. Now, these 10 spheros, as we call them, and God, these 10 attributes in the soul reflect the 10 spheros. God has also expresses himself through these 10 attributes on a spiritual level. And much like a drop of semen, when you look at a drop, there's a drop of semen, it just looks like a very, it's simple. There's no, what we call chilukim. There are no categorizations, or there's no differences. There's no, you don't see all the limbs. You don't see all of the emotion that's going to come, but we know everything is there. Everything is there. It just hasn't been brought out yet. It hasn't become expressed until it goes into Bina, which is connected to the woman. Woman is called from the world of, she comes from the world of Bina, says in Kabbalah. And Bina then extracts it and helps everything grow. Yeah, the incubator, so to speak. Yeah, she takes everything. It says that man brings home the flour, and the woman makes it into bread. So it says that the woman is the one that, the husband or the man brings home everything very raw and whatnot, and the woman turns it into what it should be, makes it edible, makes it digestible, helps it grow and reach its potential. So the same thing over here. The soul has these 10 attributes, and it expresses itself with time. Now, let me explain. How does this work? When you understand something, and eventually you hope that it affects your emotions, right? We explained that the animal soul is not something bad. In fact, it's more powerful than the godly soul, because it actually is rooted in a much higher place. Just like you want an ox to be on your, you get much further in plowing your field if you put a yoke upon an ox or a cow or whatever, a bull. It can do a lot more if you. It's has much more strength, much more endurance than you possibly could. It can carry a lot more than you can. Same thing with the animal soul. The animal soul can take the godly soul to a much further place. Now, the animal soul is rested in the emotions. I'm sure we can all see that. I think it's pretty simple to see. A person who's very emotional is like more animalistic, works more on their instincts, more excited, more fearful than a person who's very intellectual. Intellectual is a very cold person. Hasidim are very much against intellectualism. Because it says the brain is cold. The Talmud says the brain is cold, and intelligence is cold. If it's objective, it has no emotions. However, it's an unbelievable tool, and it's a necessary tool. And what we try to do is understand something, and through contemplation, called hisbonenus, through contemplation, meditation. Why are we meditating? Hasidim believe very much in meditation. But what is meditation? Is thinking through an idea, a concept, a very lofty concept, and making it applicable to your life. Once you see how it's applicable to your life, the application, it stays with you much greater than just understanding an idea. Yeah, that's why you'll have people who are great students. They were excellent students, but they can't remember what they learned, 20 years ago. Maybe some people have that, but let's just say like a person who just solely lives to get A's and B's, or let's say A's. They just do it for the grade. So they just remember what they need to remember. They they take the test, they pass the test, and they move on. As opposed to, you'll find like people who are much more emotional. They have an emotional attachment to the idea. They'll always remember the idea. Not only remember the idea, but live with the idea. It shapes them. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to take these concepts in Torah, not just these simple concepts in Torah, but the lofty, the depth of Torah. Let's go even to Kabbalah. How is it applicable in my life? And you apply it to your life. In fact, today, they tell a story. Today's Hayom Yom, which is the daily lesson that we look at, compiled by the Rebbe. It says that a person, we see in the Gemara many times, women that would go to the sages Now, these women back then, they didn't learn Torah. No, they didn't really learn Torah, especially not on the level of the sages, who's, like we've explained, the level of intellectualism, the intelligence they had was beyond this world. They would come to them and they would ask the sage, is this chicken kosher or not? And the problem is this woman only had one chicken left. And the sage would look at it and he would say it's not kosher. But then these women would come up with these ingenious reasons for why it is kosher. And ultimately it was true. And the sages would be modeh, they would acknowledge, saying, you're absolutely right. I would never have reached the depth. It's incredible. That logic, that reasoning you had was so deep. I would never have reached it on my own. And the Talmud recounts countless times of women coming and giving ingenious explanations for why something should be kosher, considered kosher. And the explanation is because when it's nogeya b'davar, when it's something you have an emotional attachment to, you can figure out a reason. Now, I'm not saying explaining it away emotionally, because that wouldn't have worked with these sages who approach everything objectively. But when you have an emotional attachment to it, you could reach the depth of something that a pure intellect could not reach. Yeah, a pure intellectual could not reach. Saying the Hayomim was trying to emphasize that, again, through meditation, through deep meditation, you want these things to become applicable in your life. These lofty ideas, you should think after you're done, how does this apply in my life? Now, the way to get to have an emotional attachment is by contemplation. And that's why, which we're going to start with, the intelligence, chachma, bina, vadas. There are three intellectual traits, character traits. They're called the three mothers, and the emotions are called the seven doubles. Kind of a weird doubles, which we'll explain a little bit. But why is it called the three mothers? Because again, what's the idea of a mother? A mother takes the seed, she takes the object and expands on it and gets into the depth of it. And there's more, just like if you're trying to tell over a very deep idea, you might give over one parable to explain the idea, but if the person doesn't really understand the idea, you'll need more and more parables. You need to dumb it down, so to speak, more and more. And therefore, the Torah calls that a greater revelation of the idea. Yeah, you keep saying more and more parables. It says that King Solomon, which we'll say in this chapter, his logic is that he was so deep. When he would say over an idea, he could give 1,000 parables, 3,000 parables, in order for you to understand it. 3,000 parables. I don't even know. I don't even think they're being hyperbolic. I think it was just, he had an intelligence that would blow you away, to say the least. So why is that interesting? Because when Moses, besides the fact that that's just interesting, when Moses, there was a great joy when Moses broke the tablets and brought down a new set of tablets, right? During these 40 days, Moses is going up there and getting the second set of tablets. When the second set of tablets came, there was a great joy, and it says that Moses' face shone brightly to the extent that it shone so greatly that he had to wear a veil the rest of his life. Why? What happened over here? Because the second time Moses went up, God explained the Torah to him in an even more expansive way. He dumbed it down, so to speak. We received the oral Torah. An even greater revelation of Torah happened. And so therefore there was a great joy amongst the Jewish people with the second set of tablets, even greater than the first set, because there was an even greater, it was even more understandable than it was before. In fact, it wasn't really so understandable to the average Joe at the time. And that was done. What happened was Moses was now on the level of his chachma was now on the level of bina, and so therefore it was much more expansive, and basically his whole essence, his whole being was shining greater, was more expansive, it was more people could be more receptive to it. It was just shining greater. and the people couldn't look at him. It shocked them. It was too much. It was actually just too much for them, that he had to wear a veil. Whatever, the parak doesn't really get into that, but I wanted to just mention that. Okay, so I'm going to go inside the text a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about what this means, this 3 mothers and the 7 doubles, and how do we ultimately get to what's called moyach shalat alalei, where the mind can control the heart. The Tanya says the mind, moyach shalat alalei, that your mind can control your heart. And I'll say one little story over here. The Alter Rebbe had a chassid named Moshe Meislish. He didn't have a beard. I think he didn't have a beard. Very intelligent. And he was a spy. Who did he spy on? Napoleon was coming to take over Russia. And the Alter Rebbe actually sided with Russia, with the Tsar, much to the chagrin and the disappointment of all other rabbinic authorities in Russia at the time. In fact, I think it was like 99% of all rabbinic authorities wanted Napoleon to win the war. Why? Because Napoleon was promising freedom of religion, and the Tsar certainly wasn't so great to the Jews. But what the Alter Rebbe saw was Napoleon wasn't going to give freedom of religion; he was going to give freedom from religion. That ultimately the Jewish people were going to abandon Judaism because they're going to have such luxury and such freedom that they're ultimately not going to want to keep Judaism anymore. I think we see that today to a certain extent. And so what happened was Moshe Meislish one time was okay. So he was in the he was able to, he spoke French. I don't exactly know the whole story, but it's a true story. He became an advisor or a minister for Napoleon. He worked within Russia, like he became like a liaison, working within Russia. He was supposedly like some sort of spy to a certain extent for Napoleon. But he really wasn't. And Napoleon one time walked into a room with a group of ministers, and he said, "We have a spy here, a spy for Russia." Because Russia seemed to always been one step ahead, or whatever the story was. And he looked at Moshe Meislish, and Napoleon put his hand on Moshe's heart to see if his heart would beat extremely fast. And it didn't. It stayed very calm. And Napoleon said, "Okay, clearly it's not you, because you would be freaking out." And Moshe Meislish was in fact the spy. And he said afterwards, if it wasn't for this parak of Tanya, this chapter of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe taught me that the mayach, that the thoughts, your mind, controls your emotions, I would have been freaking out. And with that, it saved my life. So what we're going to take away from here, again, what we're trying to do is learn how to control the animal instinct. And we're going to work from the soul outwards. Unlike psychology, where the psychology looks outward in, it sees your actions and what you say and what all these things, and works it and tries to come to conclusions what's going on inside. The Alter Rebbe starts on the inside and moves its way out. So let's go inside the text a little bit. Nefesh, ruach, uneshama. All the levels of these 3 soul levels. We know there are 5 levels of the soul: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida. Nefesh, ruach, and neshama are within the body. Those are the parts of the soul which are within the body. Chaya and yechida, we say, hover over the body. They actually don't come fully into the body. So the nefesh always remains with the body, as we've said many times, even after the person passes away. And the ruach and the neshama, those leave the body. The person passes away. So now these 3 levels, Klulo Me'eser spheres, they have within them 10 spheres. What is it? 10 faculties. Kineged Eser spheres El Yenis Shnishnash Lubehem, which correspond to the 10 attributes, the 10 spheres, as they're called, manifestations of Hashem. Hashem also has 10. But they're nechlekas l'shtayim. You can divide these 10 attributes these 10 ways, modes of expression, soul expression, into two parts. Shalosh imois v'sheva kfulos, the 3 mothers and the 7 doubles. Why doubles? One reason why they're called doubles, emotions are called doubles, is because you can either use them out for good or for bad. So you have an intellectual concept. There's no like, it's not bad or good then. Yeah, being a true intellect is it's being objective. It's not good or bad. You're just trying to understand the concept. Once it travels into your emotions, then it's, am I going to use this out for the right reasons or am I going to use it out for the wrong reasons? So they're called doubles. That's one of the reasons why they're called doubles. They have other reasons. According to Sefer Yetzirah, I don't totally understand them. And in fact, I spoke to the Tanya rabbi in our class. If you see over here, see how there's like these explanations over here? Anything that's not in the bold was written by a person named Yosef Weinberg, who passed away. He was considered like the foremost teacher of Tanya, taught over the radio. The Rebbe loved him, and the Rebbe checked over all of this. And the Rebbe was what's called Magia. He edited everything here. And his sons, he had 3 sons, 2 of whom, all 3 of them are shluchim, Chabad rabbis around the world. 2 of them translated it. It was originally written in Yiddish, and they translated it into English. So this is their English translation of that. So to speak, the Rebbe edited this. And the 3rd son lives in he's one of the rabbis in our Chabad house. So I asked him just before I came here, what are the Sheva Kfulos? And he said, I don't know. So who teaches Tanya very often. So anyway, Perush, Chachma, Bina, and Das. The first, what is Chachma, Bina, Vadas, which is the acronym Chabad. The first intellectual, the first 3 attributes, the way the soul expresses itself intellectually, is Chachma, Bina, and Das, and the Shivas Yimei Binyan, Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferes. What is Chachma? What is Bina? What is Das? What is Chabad? Why did we take that name? Chachma, says in the Zohar, is the Barak HaMavrik. It's this, when you're trying to understand an idea, sometimes you're trying to like figure out an idea, and you get a flash of the concept. I got it. Barak HaMavrik means a flash of lightning. It's like a flash of lightning. You cannot explain it. You just see it in its pure form. And it's for a moment. What's the next step? Bina. Bina tries to expand on the idea, the breadth and the width and the breadth of the idea. Until you reach the conclusion, I fully understand that, and that's called Bina. Now, a lot of times we understand something until Bina. There's something called Das. Das is when you start applying, how does this apply in my life? Most of the time, unfortunately, we do not move to Das, because Das, which means, I guess, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, whatever, we don't get caught in those terms. Das means I'm trying, where does Das come from? Where does that word come from? It says Adam nu Chava. Adam yada es Chava. Anytime the Torah speaks about an intimate relationship, it says yada. He knew her. He knew her. Why knew? Why yada? This word, because yada comes from the word hiskashros, connection. You're connecting the concept to yourself, to how it applies in your life. And we don't usually do that. Very often, the doctor knows exactly what to do, not to smoke cigarettes, not to be overweight. I know that I could probably help these people in a tsunami, probably in Afghanistan, something, if it really, but I leave it as an intellectual, unfortunately, I leave it as an intellectual exercise. I leave it at Bina. I understand everything. And I'll tell you, I'll speak out the truth, but I won't really act on it. I can speak it because speaking that is a big deal. I can just tell you what I'm thinking, but to actually be motivated to move and to be motivated to need the emotions involved, that requires a lot more work, and that's called Das. That's connection, connecting the idea to yourself. How does it apply in your life? That's still part of the emotive attributes. I mean, the intellectual attributes, the intellectual traits. Chabad is all about, this is what Chabad is all about. This is what differentiates Chabad Hasidim from other types of Hasidim. in case you wanted to know. Chabad is all about being intellectual, understanding we have no problem trying to get to the deepest parts of Torah, taking on the most intellectually stimulating, difficult pieces of wisdom from the Torah, but apply it now to our lives and live it, not just think it, but actually live it. As opposed to a lot of other Hasidim, they're called chagas, chesed givur tiferes. They're chagas Hasidim, where they really just attach themselves to people who understand, who have applied it maybe to their lives to make it, the das to them, to their lives, and you see their emotions. They get very emotional, and they hang around those people. Yeah, when you're around an excited person, you also get excited. You're around a person who's down all the time, you get down. And chances are you're probably going to move away from them. That's called chagas. That was they would attach themselves to a tzaddik, and the tzaddik would live it, and they would try to, through osmosis, essentially, that's how they would live their life. It's a pretty good life. But the author Rebbe said, I want my chassidim, I want them to be their own walking little mini tzaddik, so to speak, called the Beinani. Not a tzaddik by any stretch of the means, but his own. He wanted to become a Beinani. You have to do all the work yourself, and we'll guide you. We'll be like a guide by the side. So now the Shivas Yimei Habinyan, the 7 days of creation. Each day of creation correspond. This is how God created the world. God created the world through before the world came into being. God, so to speak, worked with His mind, basically drawing out the plan. And then He had what's called the Shivas Yimei Habinyan, the 7 days of building. When God built the world, God now moved into the 7 emotive traits, and that gave birth, right? That's the birth of your thoughts. The birth of your thoughts move into your emotions. God created the world each day corresponded to one of the 7 emotive traits. The first one being chesed. If I'll show a picture of the 10 sfirot. I'm sure you've seen it in Kabbalah. Anytime you ever see a picture of a Kabbalah book, it has the 10 sfirot. The first one being chesed. God created the world the first day with chesed, right? He gave. There was light. He gave. And then God had to hide that light. It was too much. He couldn't create the world with so much light. So then it followed gevura. Gevura means to hold back, to withdraw. Gevura is also a form of kindness, though, right? If, like we always say, that my child wants to play with a knife. So if I'm chesed, if I'm very kind means to give, I'll give my child a knife. Now that's not very kind to the child. It has to temper it with my gevura. I have to temper it with my gevura. That's ultimately better for the child. It's also a form of chesed. The whole world is now actually built on chesed, of kindness. God is the ultimate one of kindness. But that's the same thing as us. We want to be givers. That the way to really create our potential and be true to ourselves and have true happiness is by emulating God, because that's who we are at our core. We are these 10 spheros at our core, just like God. So how does God create the world? How does God operate? He's a giver. He's a giver, and then He gave a tremendous amount, and He just kind of like pulls it back a little bit so that we be able to fully grasp and appreciate everything. That's how if you want the trick to happiness, emulating God by being a giver, being a true giver, a giver in the right sense. That's how you'll be true to yourself. And when you're true to yourself, you'll feel happy. If you start trying it, you'll appreciate it. So just moving on a little bit further. Same thing in man. So we also have these 10 spheres divided into 2, seichel and midas, and intellectualism and character traits. Seichel, kailo, chachma, bina, das. Seichel is made up of chachma, bina, and das, like we just said. And the midas are avos Hashem and yiros Hashem. Ulapachad. Okay, and then we're going to move into more of the details of what the 7 emotive traits are. But we're kind of out of time, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of a brief introduction of what we're going to talk about. Does anybody have any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is this like modeled after Pardes, or because I recognize?
Yes, there's a lot of Pardes in this. I mean, this is all coming from Kabbalah. You think Pardes like Pshat, Remesh, Drus, and Sod, or are you talking about like Kabbalah books?
The Kabbalah, the story, the parable of the four sages, and they walk in and.
Yes, that's a great story. Is that modeled after this? I don't think this. No, I don't. I can look into the sources, but I don't think the Pardes. No, that story I don't think is. Although, let me just briefly tell the story, and it's a very. Actually, it's a little bit off topic. I won't bring it up. That's a very. I will bring that up one day because that's very important, in general, to life and to Judaism and to everything. But here it's a little bit. It's not Nagaya. But all of these are rooted in the works of the Arizal. Basically, the Alter Rebbe is quoting a lot from the Arizal and Reb Chaim Vital. That's what I thought you were going to say. All the Kabbalists. Does anybody have any other questions? What we're gonna get into is that sometimes a human needs to start with his intellect. Yeah, think before you speak, think before you act. Yes. What we're going to differentiate, what we're going to try to figure out is when is it coming straight from emotion? When is emotion really initiating? And when is intellectualism? And when are you being objective? When is your seichel, your intellect, initiating? The nefesh elokis, your gali soul, rests in your intellect, in your seichel, in your brain, and your animal soul, your animal instincts are in your heart, which are called the midas, the emotions. So we're going to take apart what are these. So therefore, you know what is coming from what. Because once you understand the root, it explains all the symptoms, and you'll be at peace with a lot of the way you act, and we'll be able to rectify. Ultimately, that's what we're going to get to. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? So why is it that the pizza sauce is dripping from my mouth whenever I'm seeing something horrific on television? Because I haven't really applied it to my life. I haven't really. How is this really applicable in my life? If I really knew what was going on, and how do you do that? How do you make it applicable in your life? Meditate upon the idea. How do I apply this in my life? Then you'll be much more motivated to act. Yeah. We should be meditating on the right things. I just want to end off that the word for simcha, as I always say, what's the word for joy? Simcha is the same letters. Simcha is shin, mem, ches, and hey, which are the same letters as machshava, mem, ches, shin, and hey, which are thoughts. Whatever you think about, whatever you meditate upon, that's what's going to affect you. And to have true joy is to fill your thoughts with the right kind of thoughts, the right kind of intellect, and the right kind of ideas, and it'll affect your emotions. All right. Shkayach, everybody. I'll upload this soon, and we will continue next week. Good night.